And joining us now here on OBX Today Live, presented by Gallup Funeral Services, is Jessica Sands. She is the director of the Dare County Arts Council, and Chris Sawin, who is the former director of the Dare County Arts Council and now at the Outer Banks Community Foundation. Thanks for joining us here on OBX Today Live. And we're here to discuss, as our headline at obxtoday.com says, a remarkable man, Edward Greene, who passed away last week. And there's so many things that he did here on the Outer Banks, Manio specifically. We're talking before we started recording about all the different things that he was involved with. And I want to start with you, Chris, because you being at the Outer Banks Community Foundation, that probably is the one thing that he may have been most proud of being a part of starting with so many others here because of the impacts it has made to so many lives on the Outer Banks.
Yeah, he is part of a big part of what is a wonderful origin story for our organization. He was, widely recognized as one of our 4 founding fathers, and it all started in 1982. A lot of things were happening in Dare County in 1982. I think we were coming out of a period where the Outer Banks was being discovered. I remember growing up down here, there was a lot of new advertising about, the Outer Banks, a secret worth keeping. And we were starting to see more and more visitors in the summer. My folks were in the hospitality industry, so we were seeing it firsthand. And with that came issues, problems. Anytime you go through a growth spurt in any kind of area, the benefits also bring the challenges with it as well. He was invited by David Stick, the noted author and civic leader here on the Outer Banks, son of Frank Stick, one of the most notable artists in Outer Banks history. He was invited along with Andy Griffith and George Crocker, who owned a restaurant by George in the Galleon Esplanade, to a secret meeting. And I think that's sort of one of the cool parts of the origin story is, David Stick asked him, if I invited you to a meeting and I didn't tell you what it was about, would you come? And he also said, George and Andy will be there as well. And I think that, I don't think many people said no to David Stick. So Edward was the one who had the foresight to realize something big might happen, even though he didn't know what it was. So he invited a photographer. And the photograph they took of that first meeting is here in the office. It's on our homepage of our website. It really is sort of the image that it represents the beginning of the organization, and the purpose of our organization has remained constant from that moment to now, and that is to serve the needs of the Outer Banks, the unmet needs. The government and commerce solve a lot of needs for our citizens, but there's a gap, and nonprofits fill that gap. And the Outer Banks Community Foundation's goal is to support those nonprofits and do other things like scholarships and stuff. So we've got a big portfolio, but it all started with these 4 guys getting together. Edward being smart enough to know that something interesting was going to happen. And it really grew from there. And they had a plan from the beginning to involve everybody. And I think that's why they chose a community foundation over a private foundation. So they wanted to involve everybody in the community. And he started along with others, started a program for reaching out to everybody. That when they did a press conference to announce the creation of the organization at the aquarium, there's 150, 200 people there, and people gave immediately. Since then, we've grown to a $25 million foundation, distributed over $12 million in funding to causes throughout our area. And when I was fortunate enough to get offered the position here to lead the community foundation this summer, the first week I was here, I called Edward, and I called Richard as well. Talked to both of them separately, both Edward and Richard Lasserre. And it was the last time I talked to Edward, and he was so kind. He was kind from the first moment I started working with him all the way to our last conversation. And he was happy for me that I was here, and that, you know, it was something that meant a lot to him. But he said something that really stuck with me. The thing that he liked the best about the Outer Banks Community Foundation was that on its board of directors and in its leadership, it always attracted the best of the civic leadership here on the Outer Banks. And, you know, he didn't realize it, but he was also talking about himself when he said that. So that's sort of my connection with him as it relates to the community foundation. And, you know, I'm really lucky to have known the guy.
I think we all were. That's one thing, you know, growing up in Currituck, my parents being business owners on the highway, and, you know, we always talk, growing up driving by the billboard up in Moyock that they had, those little connections that we all had. Edward was always gracious whenever we would go down and see him at the store, and he would come into my parents' grocery store when he was up headed to Norfolk. He'd stop by and say, hey, because, you know, that was one thing about the business community as a whole here on the Outer Banks and on the mainland. We're all tied together because it was, you know, at that point in the 80s, and as you said, when the boom really happened, Edward was at the forefront of it with the Christmas shop. And arts was one of the things he was so tied into, and that's really what he started the Christmas shop. And if you've seen the documentary, it was started as an art gallery, the Island Art Gallery and Christmas shop. And Jessica, with that in mind, chance to talk about one of the legacies that will live on for forever is the arts festival that Edward was so key and instrumental in starting in downtown Mania.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I love most about his story is that he came here as a dancer in the Lost Colony. You know, that's what brought him here. And I love hearing him talk about how he fell in love with the place. And you can, once you learn more and more about him, you find out that he is part of the fabric of everything here in Mania, you know, all of it. And one of the big things is the New World Festival of the Arts, which we are going to be holding the 40th anniversary of this coming August in 2022. So he started this festival in 1981 to bring people to Mania. That was the big point of it. He loved the town. He was part of the group that was revitalizing it. And his one big requirement of this festival, even when we took it over in 2013, was that it has to stay in Mania. You know, he didn't want food vendors because he wanted it to be a gift to the town that he was going to bring in, that this festival was going to bring in tons of people to discover how lovely Mania is. And as we know, it's just grown and grown. And so this festival brings in fine artists from the whole East Coast. It's not just, you know, North Carolina. And we have thousands of people who look forward to it every year. And it's grown over the years, upwards of 80 vendors some years. So it's fantastic. We were already coming up with some ideas of how to celebrate the 40th year. And now we're starting to brainstorm how we can honor Eddie also this coming year.
And you talk about Jessica founding in 1981. Chris and I growing up here. I mean, 1981 in Mania was when things really had started to turn. Downtown Mania wasn't a place you really went to. I mean, the sewage treatment plant was out there where the lighthouse is now, and the oil rigs, which are right next door to the courthouse. I mean, it was not somewhere that people wanted to go. And Eddie was one of the most instrumental people in changing downtown Mania as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah. I graduated in 1982 from Mania High School, and my memory of it was at that time there was a Ben Franklin store, and then over where Magnolia Pavilion was the post office, which looked like it was designed by Soviet architects. I mean, it was just this drab building.
Yep.
So yeah, and it's come a long way. And you know, I'm looking at Jessica now. She's sitting there in downtown Mania, and it's such a lovely place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, the Christmas parade is going on outside. While we're talking, you know, it's just the free, and it's become, you know, the hub of arts and culture on the Outer Banks. That's Edward Greene. You know, started so many wonderful things here, and he knew the importance of arts as an actor, a dancer, all of that. You know, we have a lot. We owe him a lot. for what Manio has become, for sure.
And the Outer Banks as a whole. I mean, with the community foundation, Friends of Jockey's Ridge, when Carolista was, trying to preserve Jockey's Ridge, he was one of those who stepped in to create the nonprofit that supports Jockey's Ridge State Park. And we talk about all the businesses that he started, besides the Island Art Gallery and the Christmas shop, and that's talked about in the documentary. The downtown, what's now Downtown Books, and the garden shop, which was right across the street from the Christmas shop. All these different things that Eddie did in Mania, but it was all up and down the beach. And that's where the community foundation, I go back to that, Chris, because it wasn't just about trying to support. I mean, the community foundation grew out of his love of this place. And it continues to grow today. You talked about how big, the funds are now that are available. Eddie working right up till the day he died, really. I mean, if you think about it, trying to promote people giving back to the community.
Yeah, if you go, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the Dare Heritage website, Dare County Heritage. It was Community Foundation helped fund the archiving of all of the copies of the Coastland Times back to when it was the Dare County Times, I believe was the name of it, in the 30s and 40s. And if you just search Edward Greene, I have not yet done that, but if someone's watching this, maybe consider checking it out. I kind of think, you mentioned Friends of Jockey's Ridge, you have Friends of the Roanoke Island Festival Park. He's kind of like the Outer Banks Forrest Gump. He's like in the back of every photo
Yeah.
of the announcement of just about any great thing that happened here. But specifically for the community foundation, I can't stress enough the feeling that Edward and those who joined him in the creation of the organization had, that it had to be community driven. It was thousands and thousands of people contributing. There are lots of big private foundations and big public foundations that are started with one big lump sum gift, and that's just not been the case here. And the areas of focus that we have really are broad spectrum, from health and human services to arts and culture, disaster relief, scholarships. And if you go back and look at the first awards that the Community Foundation gave, it's those categories. That hadn't changed since the 1980s. The first gift was to Outer Banks Hotline. And that was because at that point, it was a long distance call from Hatteras Island to the crisis line. And so they established an 800 number, which, back then you had to pay extra for. And the second award given was to a scholarship recipient. So even in the first days, the goal was this broad spectrum of needs that were not being met by the first two economic sectors that we have globally, and that is government and commerce. And that's where the nonprofit world fills the gap. And when I was at the Arts Council, I was thrilled to apply for and get a number of grants. We're eagerly awaiting our first grant request from Jessica. I'm sure that'll be coming down the pike soon. But the point being that it's just a really broad spectrum of community needs that those guys sought to address. Started doing it in 1982, and it continues to this day.
I'm gonna put y'all on the spot. Jessica, I'm gonna start with you first, because you might want to say, come back to me. What's one of your favorite memories of Edward Greene?
I guess you will have to come back to me.
Okay, that's okay.
No, but listen, I never got to meet him.
Okay.
And I've got to say, I only just became really entrenched in the arts world in the last 2 years when I joined the Arts Council. But you hear his name all the time. I have people coming in, talking to me. I've got people saying, they want to talk about it. They want to share his stories. So to me, it's just learning about him and learning what an important and remarkable man, as you said, he was. And I just love his love of the Outer Banks. He says in the documentary about that people always asked him, why don't you travel? You're going to regret it. And he loved this place so much, and he didn't regret not traveling. And I feel that way. I raised my family here. We love the Outer Banks. You can live anywhere, but the community feeling here that he talks about and that he's, responsible for fostering, I think is probably, his lasting legacy and the thing that I really relate to the most. So,
Chris, you like me being native here. Give me yours.
Well, whenever I spoke to him, he always asked how my mom and dad were doing. That really, like some people, all of us know folks who their first inclination is to know you rather than talk about business when you talk to him. But I think having had a number of interactions with him and having him trust me with some stuff that was really important to him was flattering. But there's one thing that I think I've never told anybody until Jessica and I were talking about this yesterday. We have an issue with the elevator in the courthouse, and it's being fixed by the county. The county owns the building, but it's taken a long time because it's a specialty elevator, and they actually have to build it from scratch, the vendor. And Edward wanted to come on a number of occasions to art shows that we had upstairs, and he couldn't. He did go to the premiere of the documentary that Brian made of his life, and that was a couple of summers ago. But the EMS folks had to, pick up his wheelchair and take him upstairs, and he didn't want. He didn't like people having to help him. He was very self-sufficient. So he called me one time to ask if the elevator was working, and I told him the story about how difficult it was, and the county had tried a number of things that wouldn't work, and they were concerned and wanted to get it done, but it was taking forever. And he said, well, I'll call over there because I'm very good at being the squeaky wheel. I'm very good at being the old man who sweetly asks when something's going to be done. And he kind of knew what his superpower was. He was so friendly and so lovely, but he got the job done, and he used that personality and the persona that he had in the community of this nice older gentleman to kind of twist some arms sometimes. And I just thought that was really cool that he had that self-awareness that he could call the county and it would mean something different than if I called the county again.
Yeah, you brought up asking about parents. That was one of the things when we would go in the Christmas shop, and I wasn't with mom and dad as I was in college and older and bringing my kids up there. He always asked how mom and dad were doing. And so it just that's going to be my favorite memory of Eddie, and seeing him at the store. I mean, that was where I probably interacted with him during, when the Christmas shop was still open. It was because living in Currituck, going down there, it was always a must do, in no matter what time of year. But y'all, thanks for joining me this morning to talk about Edward Greene and sharing just a few little memories there. And we look forward to, Jessica, the 40th anniversary of the New World Festival of the Arts. It should be a very special one. And obviously, Chris, with the Community Foundation and all the great work that y'all are doing there, I'm sure we're going to see more things that are probably going to be dedicated to Edward's memory as well here in the coming months. Thanks y'all very much.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks for having us.